Tantatia turamatia, te tuapapa o te mātatu Aotearoa, ki runga, ki raro, ki uta, ki tai. Koia ko te manakitanga, te whanaungatanga, te pono, me te whakamana i te ako. Home e, hui e, tai ki e. E te ti, e te tā, e ngā iwi katoa. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai ki tēne perenga rauhuia, ki tēne huihuinga kōrero. Whakatau mai rā ki tēnei tere terenga rauhuia, leading change processes in education. Ko Kim Bonington toku ingoa, ko o tētahi o ngā tohutohu mātua mo te mātatu Aotearoa. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Kim Bonington, and I am one of the senior advisors here at the Teaching Council, and I am a teacher. The Educational Leadership Capability Framework describes the act of strategically thinking and planning as follows: that leaders ensure that the organisation's vision, goals and expectations of staff, learners and whānau are shaped in ways that engage the organisational community, such as staff, learners, whānau, community and other stakeholders in a meaningful way. This will mean that what is constructed is shared, will motivate, and will keep the organisation improving in line with a strong moral purpose, desiring the success of each and every one of their learners. We are so pleased to be able to bring this discussion to you today. We welcome you to this Rauhuia Symposium, a chance to learn, a chance to share with other leaders across the motu. No mai kia piri, no mai kia tata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker. Dr. Mark Osborne is an educator by background and has worked across the New Zealand education system as a teacher, school leader and consultant for the past 3 decades. Mark initially trained as a primary school teacher before working in the secondary sector for 15 years. The majority of his work is in change leadership and professional learning, supporting schools to implement change projects. Mark holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne on change leadership and education and has published widely on how to lead change in schools. We welcome you, Mark. Thank you.
Kia ora, Kim. Thank you very much. Kia ora te whānau. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ngā mihi from Te Aratu and Waitakere, Tamaki Makaurau. The rohi of Te Kawerau Maki, ko Mark Osborne tōku ingoa, ko kai whakahaere o Arahi Ako, ahau. I'm the Director of Leading Learning. As you heard in my introduction, I'm a teacher, consultant, facilitator, leadership coach, and my PhD in change leadership has given me the opportunity, very lucky opportunity, to research how change happens in schools and to work alongside schools for the last decade and a half. And it's fabulous to be able to share some of that research with you, particularly what it takes to foster a culture of curriculum innovation. I'm going to start with a quotation by George Bernard Shaw: "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." What we're really talking about when we talk about innovation, creating a culture of innovation, is change. And as Shaw reminds us, change starts with us and our own ways of thinking. If we can't change our own practices, then we certainly won't change anything else. But why change in the first place? Why innovate at all? Why is change needed? And one of my go-to phrases is that standing still is going backwards. The world changes every day, and we need to make sure that our curriculum and our pedagogy and our assessment and relationships and use of technology and everything else is fit for purpose, and that we're meeting the needs of our young people. Standing still is going backwards. If we're still teaching this year the way that we did last year, which was the way we did the previous year, then we're inevitably going backwards. But for the purposes of today's symposium, we're going to be looking specifically at curriculum and how to create the conditions for fostering a curriculum that is as good as it can possibly be. How to foster a culture of curriculum innovation. So what I've done is I've drawn together 7 guiding principles from the research literature. 7 principles that will create a curriculum, a culture of curriculum innovation. And as a little thought experiment, what I'd like to do is throw to you to say, if I asked you to come up with 7 guiding principles, what would they be? What would the inputs that you think would be most important for creating the outcome of a school culture, organizational culture that promoted or prioritized curriculum innovation? And while you're thinking about that, I will just say that actually the odds are against us, all as school leaders or people leading change. When it comes to change, it's a real challenge. There's a range of different studies that come through in the research that suggest that anything up to 60 or 70% of significant change efforts fail to achieve their intended goals, 60 to 70%. So what that means is that after 2 years of pretty concerted implementation, there's very little evidence of change practice. The power of the status quo, or the power of what we're currently doing at the moment, tends to edge out change or innovation. And I think that's a real shame. That's a huge, when you think about the huge amount of human effort that goes into change, to see after 2 years little evidence of change practice, that's just such a waste of human effort. I think it's a real tragedy. And there's a few reasons for that, a range of different reasons. Partly because very few of us as leaders have experience in leading significant change efforts. We're often used to leading small incremental changes or a project that's quite self-contained within the context of our schools. But part of it's also that thing that I mentioned before, is that idea of the status quo. Status quo bias is simply the preference for what we're currently doing instead of what we might do. And it's a really powerful driver of human behavior. The status quo, what we know, we're comfortable and familiar with, is often really predictable and dependable. It might not be perfect, but it's what we're familiar with. And it's a lot more reassuring than some sort of uncertainty or some sort of unknown. And so what we as school leaders need to do is to deeply understand how to lead change well if we're going to shift the dial on those 60 to 70% statistics, particularly if we're talking about curriculum. So if we're going to avoid standing still, avoid going backwards, we really need to understand these guiding principles of change. What we need to do is provide our young people with a continually evolving, challenging, enriching curriculum. And what we need to do is understand these guiding principles of change. So let's kick off with number 1. I wonder what your number 1 would be. What is the guiding principle above all others that you think is most important? For me and for a range of researchers, it's the idea of a sense of urgency. So everyone in your kura feels a commitment to the change or a commitment to the mission. The opposite of a sense of urgency is complacency. And complacency just doesn't produce change. Complacency means low standards often, and it often means a just enough is good enough mentality. This is okay, so why change it? We're complacent. And the metaphor that's most commonly used to describe a sense of urgency, the one that's on your screen right now, is the burning platform. And it's a really interesting story behind this. It comes through into the research literature from 1986. Those of you that are alive back then, there was a big oil rig explosion and fire in the North Sea. It was called the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster. And the oil rig exploded, and it was a very dangerous situation. There was a guy who was below deck at the time. His name was Andy Mocan. He came up on deck and he peered over the side of the oil rig and he saw 11 stories down, a really long fall, the icy cold North Sea. There was debris from the explosion in the North Sea. There was fire. And he looked over and he looked behind him and he could see the explosions going on in the oil rig. And he had a really challenging decision to jump into the water or stay on the oil rig. And he jumped and survived, giving the story away there. But he was interviewed in hospital afterwards. And the interviewer said that must have been a really difficult decision for you to make that leap into the North Sea. And he said, actually, it was the easiest decision I've made in my life. It was either jump or fry. And so the burning platform has come to symbolize the idea that doing nothing is worse than making a change. You can't stay on the burning platform. Whatever it is that we're doing, we can't persist with it. And so if you're leading something, it's actually really useful to have a burning platform, a compelling reason to change. Do you have a clear and compelling reason for why curriculum innovation is needed? Or is that idea of just enough is good enough prevalent in your school? If you have that clear sense of urgency, do you communicate it daily or hourly with the people around you? Is it, maybe it's something like falling student achievement. If your achievement is gradually tracking downwards year after year, that's a burning platform. You have to turn that around. Or maybe it's growing inequity in student achievement. Is that getting exacerbated? Is it decreasing student achievement? Student engagement? Is it increasing problematic behavior as a result of that disengagement? Whatever it is, it's really useful to have a burning platform and make sure that everybody feels that as well, because that drives a commitment to change. If you haven't got a compelling burning platform within your school, it's really easy to look beyond your four walls and to say, actually, if we look globally and put my pessimistic hat on, democracy is in danger around the world at the moment. I think that's a burning platform that means we need to look hard at what we're teaching our kids. We've got challenges with technology and social media. We've got issues with AI and the reshaping of the job market that these kids are going to go into. We've even got things like IQ rates falling for the first time in decades across the developed world. Nobody really knows why that is. But the Flynn effect tells us that IQ should increase generation after generation. And for the first time, it appears to be going backwards. So is that a problem with the schooling system? Is that technology? Is that social media? Who knows? But those are really driving, compelling, burning platforms for me that mean that the work that we do in curriculum, in pedagogy, in relationships is really compelling. The second part of the story, and I bring Steve Jobs in here, is it's all very well to be doom and gloom about the burning platform, but what we need is some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. We need some sort of positive part to the story. And all compelling, charging, energizing stories have both a positive and a negative component. If the burning platform is the negative component, then the positive component is your vision, you as a leader, but also your school's vision for what you're going to do about it, something to believe in. And one of my favorite quotes by Steve Jobs is this one: if you're working on something exciting, your curriculum, your learning, your vision for learning for your kids that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. And that's the compelling story that we want to create for everybody that's part of our system. Not only are there challenges in front of us, but there are also solutions to it. And that forms the second of my guiding principles. You do need to lead with a compelling vision, something that will pull people in, that will draw them into the change. And it not only has to be compelling from your point of view, it also has to be compelling for the people around you. So balance that sense of urgency with your compelling vision. It could be your school vision. If your school vision is aspirational and fit for purpose, then that's a great thing to use to navigate through uncertain times. But it could also just be an articulation of the kind of curriculum you're hoping to move towards. Your compelling vision should also align with individuals' values. As it says there, if a change is incongruent with both individual and organizational values, it's likely to be either avoided or adopted ceremonially. People will give it a go when someone's looking, but when people stop looking, they'll go back to what they've already done. And so it's really important to bring people with you, and people are much more likely to innovate and to find better ways of doing things if they feel that the change is leading them closer to something that they truly care about. That compelling vision should also include the benefits. Human beings can be considered irrational loss avoiders. We hate losing things. We really dislike the feeling of going backwards. And something that'll paralyze people, both you and me included, is the fear that by trying something new, by engaging in some sort of innovation, we'll end up losing something, or we'll end up worse off than we currently are. We hate that idea. So the only counter to that irrational fear of loss that often manifests itself as status quo bias, that's where it comes from, is to make sure that your compelling vision, the potential benefits are really clear, they're really believable, and they're compelling, that people actually feel that by doing this thing, by moving into a new way of teaching and learning, they're actually going to be better off than they were the previous year. So that's got to be really clear in your compelling vision. You know, what advantage might a conceptual curriculum have over what you currently have? Or what advantage might teaching kids project-based learning and project management skills, what will that have over traditional teacher-centered ways of learning? Or how will helping kids learn about their local environment or sustainability benefit them in the future? That has to be clear for people. Number 3 is to create a culture of participation. You know, when employees choose for themselves as opposed to being told by leaders, then they're more committed to the outcome by a factor of almost 5 to 1. And I think in that observation from Klein and Sora, we've got a bit of a hint at how we can counteract some of that 60%, 60 to 70% failure rates. We need to put everyone in the driver's seat. It shouldn't be your change as a leader. It should be our change. It should be everybody involved in developing that solution, whatever it is. You know, people are more interested in seeing things through in the classroom if they've helped to craft that solution. There's loads of sayings, you know, adages that are associated with this. Change is really successful when it's done to people. It should be done with people. Or even, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. The crucial thing is to make sure that people feel that they are crafting this and it's not being done to them. A culture of participation also helps people feel that they're in control of what's happening to them. And if human beings hate loss, we also hate not being in control of things that matter to us, such as our jobs. So the more that you can put people in control of what's developed, what's tested, what's assessed, what's trialed, what's prototyped, the better. You know, as that bottom quotation observes, people are more interested in reading a story that they have helped to write. The more we can put the pen in people's hands, the more that they'll feel that they're developing a curriculum that's theirs, not yours. Uncertainty is part of this as well. One of the things that we can do by putting the pen in people's hands is to help to remove a sense of uncertainty. If people can't answer the questions like, what does it look like? I just need to see a picture of it. Or how will this work for my learners? They're less likely to give things a go in the first place. And so removing uncertainty is about making what might be quite hypothetical practice visible in schools through prototyping, through trialing, through dipping toes in the water, through having maybe open door slots where people who are testing things can invite other teachers in during non-contact or CRT time. It could also be about sharing progress and seeking feedback from people. Micro updates at the start or the end of staff meetings, that sort of thing. Sharing progress helps to remove uncertainty for those who are not currently involved in trialing or testing things. but it also helps to acclimatize people to new ideas. Even if it's just walking past a classroom where something interesting, something new, something novel is taking place. After a week or a month or a term of walking past that thing, seeing it in practice, a practitioner is probably more likely or more open to giving things a go than if we just ask them to come on board to an idea that's cold. Number 4, guiding principle number 4, is this a really interesting phrase, the idea of positive deviance, supporting positive deviance. So equally important to the process of removing uncertainty are people in the literature that are referred to as positive deviants. They're your innovators and your out-of-the-box thinkers. In most organizations that exist, they're the innovators the people have already seen the future and they've started to make moves towards it. But those moves represent a departure from what others are doing in a positive way rather than a negative way, hence positive deviance. Stepping out of line and doing things different from conventional wisdom is a bit of a risk, but this is a risk done by these people with good intentions. What they're trying to do is find better ways to do things, to get stuff done. And what they might do is hide it from you because they're worried about taking a risk, even though that practice might represent significant step forward and really the solution that we've been looking for. So know who those people are, stay close to them and support them. Rather than closing down the deviance and disliking people who tend to stray from the norm, what you need to do is have your judgment about you to identify whether this deviance is a move in the right direction or a move in the wrong direction. And channel that positive energy, guide it into prototypes and tests and little projects to have a go at things and potentially improve those emerging ideas. This is also part of the process of what's referred to as leveraging social proof. But I'm not going to say too much about that because I know that Jason's going to talk about that in a moment, the power of social proof. Guiding principle number 5 is known as the 20-mile march. And that's a phrase that comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And it emerges out of his comparison of Roald Amundsen and Robert Falcon Scott's respective attempts to get to the South Pole in 1911. One was successful and one wasn't. And the 20-mile march came out of Amundsen, who was successful, his belief that regardless of the weather, regardless of the conditions, every day that they got up, they would try to make 20 miles. And what it's come to represent is the idea of incremental progress. Rather than opening the door of the tent and having a look out and saying, oh, it's a bit windy today, I don't think we'll do too much. We'll go back, hop into our sleeping bags. We say, regardless of the conditions, let's do it. Because the shift in mindset from saying we're at the whim of external elements or we're at the whim of the weather, so we can't really do much, shifting that to saying we are actually in charge of our own destiny. No matter what the conditions, what's in front of us, we're going to make progress today, is a huge mental shift. And what Collins did when he was not only researching those Antarctic explorers, but also high-performing companies, is he identified that those companies that make incremental progress every day, thinking about today, what's one thing can I improve? Tomorrow, what's one thing can I improve? Those companies far outstripped in terms of success the others that seem to make great progress initially before running out of steam. There's a really good message in there for all of us to make small steps every day rather than launch into big, exhausting pendulum swing changes before collapsing in a heap, exhausted and needing to recover. So small steps every day, it's that idea of cultivating the mindset where you're looking for what can be improved. What's the small little tweak that I can make here rather than waiting for some big silver bullet to arrive, because we know that silver bullets don't exist in education. That's the 20-mile march. Principle number 6 is the idea of intelligent failure. Change is impossible without risks. Every time we change something, we take a risk. And risk carries with it the possibility of failure. We might not be successful. If people's primary concern is simply to avoid failure, then what we'll do is circle the wagons and not try anything at all. But enter Amy Edmondson in her fabulous research into psychological safety and intelligent failure, the idea of intelligent risk-taking. And so she's done a lot of work on the concept of failure and has pioneered this spectrum as part of her work. She argues that a fear of failure often creates a risk-averse culture in organizations, which can be counterproductive to meeting genuine need. We don't try things so we don't meet needs. Her catchphrase here is, in organizations, it's okay to fail, but you have to do it right. So talk with your leadership teams and your teachers about the kind of failure you want to see more of. Over at the left-hand side, what she describes as blameworthy is that idea of deviance, not positive deviance, but negative deviance. If I know that I'm on duty and I choose not to go, I have deviated from the expectation on me, and I've done it in a way that is potentially harmful. I should have to wear the blame for that, or I should have to give an account of why I've chosen to do that. That's an example of failure, and that's the sort of thing that we probably don't want to see a lot of. We could list a whole range of those examples of deviance. In the middle, Edmondson talks about failure that is neither blame nor praiseworthy. It often results or emerges from process complexity, or the complexity of a system, or uncertainty, or a challenge that our processes are not set up to meet. And they shouldn't be sheeted home to the individual. If the process is unwieldy or our internal systems aren't good enough, that shouldn't fall on the individual. What we should do is commit to improving those systems. The failures on the right-hand side, the praiseworthy failures, are the sorts of things that we probably want to see more and more on, particularly if we're creating a culture of curriculum innovation. Testing a hypothesis. Does this way of arranging learning work better for these students? Is this a better way of delivering curriculum information or instructions? Are these groupings a better way of putting students together? It's really inquiry-based, it's curious, and it's a sort of thing that might not work. There's a failure there that actually didn't come off, but it's the sort of failure I would take every day because it's the right intent. It's got that curious mindset, and it's designed to progress what it is that we're capable of doing. So even just talking with your teams about those 3 categories, what are the kinds of failures we don't want to see around here? What are the ones that we want to try and avoid? And what are some that we really actually want to encourage? That creates a culture of innovation. Often we talk about failure as just being a yes or no. We either failed or we didn't, and we don't have nuance or subtlety around those conversations. Amy Edmondson argues that we need nuance in those discussions if we're going to foster innovation. And so the last of my guiding principles is centered around this idea of the diffusion of innovation. And it's the way that a new idea or a new practice spreads through a social system. And so in this case, it's a school. Once the idea pops up, how quickly does it become common practice? And when you've done the hard work of fostering innovation, those green shoots, those promising ideas that emerge, what we need to do is make sure that they spread right the way through the organization. If they're so good, every student should have access to them. They should benefit from those innovations. And just as importantly, every student should experience their time through school as a consistent, coherent, joined up experience rather than things that are piecemeal or ad hoc. And so when new ideas emerge, it's important to make sure and that they're valuable and beneficial. It's important that they're widely adopted. And so this is where the diffusion of innovation comes through. Now, you may be familiar with this graph. In a moment, I'm going to put a bit more detail on it if you're not familiar with it. But this is how Rogers argues innovations diffuse through organizations or through social systems. At the left-hand side, you have your innovators, the people who often emerge new ideas. Those are our positive deviants, or they might be the people who are first to hear within a school about some promising new approach. And then we have the next group, which are the early adopters. That's often a phrase that people are quite familiar with, and so on through the social system. And so originally, Rogers developed this to describe the way that technology moves through social systems. So, for example, your innovators and early adopters are the first people to pick up the latest, greatest mobile phone, cell phone. Then it gradually moves through the early and the late majority before maybe eventually getting to the laggards, although the laggards might still have landlines and no mobiles. There's a long tail there. But what he did with his research, and other people subsequently have identified, that this tracks not only with technology, but also with new ideas and how they move through social systems. So when a new approach to curriculum or some kind of change emerges in a school, it's really helpful to understand what the different adopter categories need to come on board. That gap there between early adopters and early majority, Rogers refers to as the chasm. And he argues that it's the hardest bridge to cross, to move between these adopter categories, partly because there are two different mindsets at play between the ones on the left and the ones on the right of the chasm. The ones on the left, he describes as visionaries. Those are people who can already see the future and they want to move towards it. The big challenge for them is how to do it. I know I want to achieve these outcomes, but what's the tool that's going to let me do that? The people to the right of it, Rogers refers to as the pragmatists. And so their main question, instead of how, is why. Why would I do this thing? What's in it for me? In what way is it beneficial for my students? How does it work? Is it better than what I'm currently doing? Lots of those very pragmatic, concrete details. Neither of those adopter categories is right or wrong. They just have different needs to be met before they'll come on board with something. And so Rogers offers us a wee bit of advice on how to work with visionaries and pragmatists. The people who are the early adopters and the innovators, we probably want to support them with early support, mentoring, resourcing, give them a bit of planning time if you can, or if they need some resources to be able to develop their ideas further, make that available to them. Share what they're doing with others, make it known. The visionaries are also really useful to streamline and improve the systems so that when the pragmatists come to an idea, it's much easier for them to adopt. So it's really about refining and improving those ideas or knocking the rough edges off to smooth the way for subsequent later adoption. Also, when we do eventually move it towards more widespread adoption, these are your leaders. These are the people who can engage in coaching and mentoring and support for the people who come later. Pragmatists, they have very different needs. And what we do need to do is remove risk for them. So make it as easy as possible to implement. You demonstrate really clear proof of benefits. Work with low-hanging fruit. What is the simplest, easiest way to have a go at this new idea? If it requires them to replan, an entire week's worth of learning, then that's a big barrier for them. But if it's to try one approach for half a lesson or to work with one group at a time and then to reflect on whether it's been successful or not, then that's much easier for them to enter into. Simple starts, working incrementally, focus on really pragmatic things like logistics and workload and tools and timing. And then again, we see that idea of social proof. Enable them to work together, to collaborate, to work with their peers. There should be real benefit from whatever this change is, this new practice. If we're using a project-based learning approach to curriculum, what is the benefit of that? Is it more engaging for the learners? Do we see lifts in achievement? Is it a better way to integrate literacy and numeracy into conceptual learning? When you're working with your visionaries, that's exactly the proof of benefit you can gather by surveying students, by analysing achievement data, by seeking teacher feedback and teacher observations. And that benefit then can move to the pragmatist to say, there's something in this, there's something worth serious consideration. So those are the 7 guiding principles. Here's a little memory test for you. What were they? How many can you remember? I warned you as a teacher. Can you remember all 7? You can probably remember the last one. Let me run through them for you. Number 1 was that sense of urgency, that burning platform. Why? The first question any of us need to be able to answer when we're engaging in change is, why should I change? What's wrong with what I'm currently doing? Because if it's meeting the need, I'm just going to keep going with it. And that's a very sensible thing to do. But if we've got a burning platform and a sense of urgency, then we understand why we need to change. We balance that challenge with the potential solution, a compelling vision. This is worth pursuing. This is worth doing the mahi on. That's number 2. Number 3 is to create a culture of participation so that people can feel that they are part of writing that change story. Number 4, find the positive deviants. There are people doing really cool things in your school already. They may be hiding it from you, but if you can find them and support them and celebrate them, then that becomes a really powerful vehicle for advocating for that change. Number 5 was to embrace the 20-mile march or make consistent progress every day. Number 6 was that culture of intelligent failure, where we're looking for praiseworthy failures, hypothesis testing. And number 7, as we've just finished, is to understand the diffusion of innovation, or how new ideas move through a social system. So that's quite a heavy research base there. There's not a lot of practical, concrete classroom tools, but that's where Jason's going to dive in and talk in a moment a little bit about what some of these ideas look like in a school. Before I hand over back to Kim, I will just say, if you're interested in resources, there's a lot of detailed resources on our website. That QR code there points to a site that I use to store a lot of my resources that I use for leadership coaching. And there's a range of things on there, free resources to do with, things like, that spectrum of intelligent failure is on there for download. The diffusion of innovation resources is there, a whole bunch of stuff to do with developing a smart risk-taking culture. So you're welcome to jump on there and grab those resources if that's of interest to you. My email's there. It'll be shared afterwards as well. If you've got any questions or anything, feel free to get in touch, but more than happy to help. That's it from me this afternoon. Back to you, Kim.
Kia ora, Mark. Thank you so much for that presentation, for inviting us to find our own 7 principles while also sharing your own. There's always so much to learn when we're delving into change and innovation. So to have such a concise list, but one that that covers all of those aspects of change, that makes it so much more manageable, is fantastic. We've had lots of questions through the chat asking if we will share your slides, and we will do that in the email that we will send out tomorrow, along with the survey where we will check how people have found the presentations. What I'm going to do before I hand over to Jason to give the second part of our presentation is I'm just going to invite you to pick up a pen or maybe your phone. You can use your thumbs or you can type into your keyboards. take time to think about Mark's presentation and write down some notes so that when you come to your breakout rooms, you know what it is that you want to talk to everybody about that you've learned. It is now my pleasure to welcome our second speaker. Jason Miles has been a principal since 1996 in 4 schools across Canterbury, U2, U4, and currently at Te Kura o Ruatanewha, Kaiapoi North School, U6 full primary school in North Canterbury. He has been an elected member of the New Zealand Principals Federation, the NZPF, executive since 2018, and in the vice president role since 2022. Thank you so much, Jason.
Kia ora koutou, ko Kaiapoi te whenua tupu, ko Pākehā hau, ko nai tuahureri te mana whenua ngā mihi kia koutou. Ko hau tumuaki o Te Kura o Ruatanewha, Kaiapoi North School, ko Jason Miles tōku ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Jason from the mighty North Canterbury. You will see that pointed out in a very big arrow there, very proud Cantabrian, and of course a very proud principal, one of the most wonderful jobs in the world. I really enjoyed Mark's presentation. Thank you for sharing those insights. I'm now looking forward to building on that. You'll see some messages that are similar, but also I'd like to bring in some aspects of my day-to-day role. So I really love this quote, and Mark sort of touched on this, that change is really the only constant in education. And everyone has their own way of coping with or equally embracing change. So in the context of curriculum change in your staff, you've probably got three types of people. First type of people are great. I enjoy finding out about new perspectives, bring it on. The second group are probably going to respond with a really? Okay, I'll give it a try. The third group are the oh my God, no group. And these are the ones that you really need to work on because they're comfortable doing what they're doing and they really don't want to change. They'll listen, but when I go back into my classroom, I'll likely carry on with how I've always done things. They need convincing. As a principal, you also need to know how you as a leader respond to change personally, and know how your staff members and community also are going to respond to change. So there are many theoretical models of educational leadership and change management. And theories are really important and great perspectives and starting points. But what I'm going to try and share with you today is my learning from 30 years of principalship in 4 schools. So firstly, there are many types of change. So there is major change or minor change. There are immediate and forced changes. And there are managed change, short-term for up to a year, but long-term for 1 year or longer. So today I'm going to focus on major long-term change. Step 1, and this is the core work for principals and leaders, and it starts before any change is identified. You need to build the relationships, and these are key when it comes to later times when you are working together in those harder times of change. So these are key. They're the staff, the board, the community, and then your communication is also key. Making sure you've got those clear channels of communication, they're clear and they're regular. And then your third aspect is integrity and trust. So over time, this is built through actions. So your trust in decision-making, your trust in doing what you say you'll do, that you care, and also trust that you are interested in people's feedback. And then you've got your stocktake of data, information, research, and verification, making sure that the information and research that you are basing your work on is authentic, and the information and data in your school is really accurate. So I like the term start small and win big. We've had 3 major long-term changes at our kura since 2012. A little event in Canterbury, bit of a coincidence there. But that led to a lot of work in collaborative teaching and flexible learning spaces. And that took up a lot of, that was a lot of work for our staff, rethinking how we were going to teach collaboratively. So that took a lot of time, but it is still in place right now. One I'm focusing on today is structured literacy, the change in curriculum, which began in 2018. And we're currently working on maths PLD with the new curriculum with the Learner First. So you'll notice there that these are all big changes, major changes, and it is crucial that you have one major PLD at once. So major change over time is planned, and we were an early adopter of structured literacy. The reason that we were is that we heard the why and understood the why of what we needed to do and change. The PLD provider we worked with was Liz Kane, and she explained that why really well. We'd worked really hard on our literacy PLD in years prior to this, but we hadn't had any major shift in our achievement. So our children were achieving at or above about 60 to 68%. So we had that burning platform that Mark talked about, that we needed to work hard and change. So the first photo there you see are our teachers, 2018, and we were all together for our first session of PLD. This was after we had some champions, some early adopters, learn about the why and test it out in our context. So from that point, we then dived in to our full staff PLD. And that we worked really hard for a number of years, and we're still working hard in literacy. But that has meant that we've had both Ministers of Education visit our kura over the last couple of years. So Jan Tinetti and Erica Stanford have come to view what we're doing. And that has only happened because of the hard work of our teaching staff and the roller coaster of progress that we made right throughout that time. I will say that Erica and Jan didn't come together, they came in separately. So for me as a leader, what is my key role in leading and supporting change for impacting student achievement? And this role can get a little lost in our daily work because of all the other busyness and support that's required. But my journey in looking at the impact of my work as a principal on student achievement this was a very important read for me. And it's our very own New Zealand professor, Vivienne Robinson's book, Student-Centered Leadership from 2011. Made a really big impression on my own practice, and it was something that I've held to my heart from that point. She found 5 different leadership domains that had significant effect sizes on student achievement in schools. First of those were establishing goals, expectations, which is the vision part, and making sure that that is done collectively. The second that has significant effect size was resourcing strategically. And this is providing PLD and resources that are required. Ensuring quality teaching, of course, that's one of them. That's the third one. And supporting this with modelling, coaching, and feedback. Leading teacher learning and development as a principal. That is being actively involved as a tumuaki. And ensuring an orderly and safe environment. So that's the systems part of a principal's job, being consistent and making sure the important aspects of the school is running well. So all 5 of these are crucial in the impact on student leadership, student achievement. But what has the most significant impact on student achievement out of those 5? I'll give you a second to think which one you think it is. I haven't got a drum roll, but I'll get it out. So I'll let you know in a moment. So this most significant factor out of those 5 is in fact twice as powerful as any of the others. And it is leading teacher learning and development as a principal, as a leader, has a huge effect size. And she found that a principal who does this makes sure that all the other aspects are being run effectively in the school, but the most important aspect is that the principal is participating as a learner with their teachers. So leading teacher learning means being proactively involved so that we're learning with our teachers. So only looking at a vision, only looking at the resources, and only working on other similar activities, you don't necessarily learn as a principal what is specifically needed to stimulate that ongoing improvement. But leaders who participate with their staff are able to join in the professional discussions and learn in detail about those challenges and the conditions that our teachers need to succeed. It allows them to have a deeper understanding of what their teams need to be successful and work to provide the resources and environments to make student achievement happen. So it's not saying that principals need to know everything, but it means it's important that the principals are in the room and participating and take the risk out of not putting the money and the resourcing into the wrong areas. So what's worked most effectively for sustainable change at our kura and amongst those 3 major changes? It's a concept called social proof. And Mark talked a little bit about this, but in my experience, for major changes over time, it is the most effective strategy because it's demonstrating positive impact on real learners and educators within your own school context. Showing, it's just not telling, and it's the key to building that positive change. It's shaping the change to impact children's learning and achievement in your own context. It's a concept from behavioural science, and it highlights the influence of those social norms. So it focuses on the premise that people follow what others do. And it's particularly those colleagues that you trust in your own context. It's local success stories building credibility over time. And it overcomes the skepticism and resistance to change of those number 3s I outlined at the start, the oh my God knows. I like what I'm doing and I don't want to change. So within that social change, social proof, we are looking for quietly working with the volunteers or your champions or your visionaries and making sure they have the resources and professional development, the observations, the modelling, the coaching that they require. And you're developing that prototype that Mark also talked about. So these are your early adopters, and they are working hard within your school context to make sure that they are working out whether this change is going to make a difference for our children. Gathering stories, examples, and insights, and sharing regularly. Now, this is sharing, as Mark said, could be walking past the doorway and finding out what they're actually doing in that classroom. But it's also formally in staff meetings, sharing what's worked well, what they're going to work on next, what hasn't worked well equally, and making sure that the board is informed and involved, and the parents have the information that they need as you go forward. because any major change in curriculum in your schools, your parents are going to be really interested in. And remember, importantly, as a leader, you need to be there participating in that major school-wide PLD. Over-investing in a small group or team to demonstrate that early success, and you're going to define that why. So the early adopters need to make sure that the why is very accessible for the rest of the staff. It's that internal review of data, the trends, the feedback, the observations, all of the voice. And knowing why is essential. I love this quote. Once you know better, you need to do better. And that's something with structured literacy in particular. Once you hear about the impact that it makes for your learners, you can't go back. And then build that internal expertise. I'm very fortunate on my staff. I've got some very skilled and experienced teachers who have led in each of those three areas that I talked about. They are the coaches to ensure fidelity, and that ensures that it's going to be ongoing, consistent, and lead staff PLD going forward, and also inducting those new staff. So again, just highlighting how social proof works in your schools. It builds credibility and trust and leads to confidence when you get to that whole school PLD. It overcomes the context and resource concerns, such as that's worked in other schools, but it'll never work in ours. Encourages openness and curiosity. It builds trust. Unlocks broader support. The viewing on site with your children and staff. It demonstrates positive impact locally. So it provides initial data and the impact on learner confidence. And it overcomes that skepticism and resistance, those number threes. So all of these aspects allow you to understand collectively that this is major change, and it will take time, far more than that 3-day workshop that is being offered at the moment for structured literacy. So now do you have a focus or need that you could use the social proof model for? What is your why? Who are your champions to invest in for a prototype? And then who are the experts in the school that you would like to then invest in further? What support and resources do they need? How will you provide opportunities for other staff to view and find out more? And what are your timeframes? Remember, major change means one focus, and it means major time. And importantly, how will you lead as a tumuaki and participate in major school-wide PLD as a learner? It's so important. Remember this, that's the quote at the start about the change is constant. How you lead and manage change is crucial to its success. Understand yours and others' reaction to change and give social proof a go. Being a teacher is tough, and being a leader is tough. Stick to your why, invest in people, and show your gratitude. It's not easy, but you'll not always be liked. And there are different career options. And there's my Steve Jobs quote. But know that this is a career where you cannot just stand still. You're always moving, you're always adapting, you're always changing. And that is where you get the satisfaction and pride in your work. It's not going to be easy, but with the working with the people, making sure they are resourced well, and that you build internal experts and coaches, you'll find that change is happening over time. Ngā mihi.
Thank you so much, Jason. You took me back to the beginning of when laptops were first introduced to staff members in primary and secondary schools. And I remember I'm looking at it now and realizing how much the concept of social proof was used at that time. There were groups of us that became ICT lead teachers within schools, and it was our job to go out and explore technology, invite and then work as mentors and coaches within schools. I remember us having days where we went into each other's classrooms for that, and that process of sharing the work that we had done by the early adopters and then helping to bring the others in was really resonating for me during that presentation. So thank you so much. It's also great to see so much of what we heard Mark speak about flow through to within your own experience. So thanks so much, Jason. Okay, everybody, I'm going to give you another minute to write down the things that resonated with you as a leader from Jason's presentation. So I'm going to give you another minute to consider these questions so that when you go into the breakout rooms, you are going to have great conversations. Thank you so much for the commitment that you've shown to your students, to your profession, and for joining us today. Thanks also to Mark and Jason for their great presentations, and also to our team who have helped me make my way through this symposium. I'm just going to put in a plug for our upcoming remaining symposium that we have in this series. On the 14th of May, we're discussing the sustaining change through coaching, mentoring, and collaboration. I'm really excited about the people that I'm lining up to talk to you in that symposium. And then on the 18th of June, we're still looking at curriculum reform, but it's in terms of inclusive education and reshaping curriculum delivery. You can actually sign up to both of those symposiums through the QR code that you can see to the right of your screen. But I also just want to put in a plug for a launch that we are doing on Thursday. Here at the Teaching Council within Rauhuia, we have been working on a leadership platform and a significant offering that we have in professional development where leaders can get together and do professional development on leadership and in educational settings. If you would like to, then you will see that there is a link that has come through in the chat, and that will take you through to sign up to that platform, and you will also get the opportunity to come to that introduction to that platform and the launch we are doing next week. But for now, I will just say farewell to you all. Kua ia ki ronga, kua ia ki raro, I rongo whakaarihia ki ronga, kia tina, tina, haumi e, hui e, tai.
Tā ki e.
Kia ora, everyone.